Hmm. Hi, everyone. We're continuing to talk about the archetype of the sacred prostitute, and I wanted to tell you a bit about my personal journey as you think about the relevance of the sacred prostitute to your life and how uh, you already are embodying the sacred prostitute. If in any way that you bring out who you authentically are, you are embodying the sacred prostitute. I was just listening a few minutes ago to that old Cyndi Lauper song of true colors shining through. And it's when we're in our true colors, when we're in our authenticity of exactly who we are, and we've unlayered that, that we really do shine through. And the sacred prostitute, I think, is a guide to that understanding, especially in these times in which we live. So I'm draped in the moment in what looks like a snake skin, and you think about how the snake um, uh, they shed their skin so that they can have a new a new skin, and so it's kind of like the reborn with this new skin, this new availability, and we come into the world, and I know. None of us are really taught to just celebrate who we are, whether we're queer or straight, or what our orientation is, our sexuality, and how we express it, how we express gender, all of those things. Seldom are we fully embraced and celebrated for all of who we are. And so that authenticity starts getting cloaked with a skin that oftentimes gets tough just to try and get us through. Um, Early in the AIDS epidemic, I worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who had written the book many years before that about death and dying. She talked about how in death and dying that there were these stages that you go through grief. So you come into an acceptance, into a peace inside of yourself. And her work was all about unfinished business that people have. And I find that that story, that understanding is the basis of a lot of the work that we do, which is that we've got all these stories, and they cloak us, and it's time for a new skin. So the journey of the sacred prostitute. So for me, my journey actually started, and I was well cloaked by then, with this skin of stories that kept me from really knowing who I was. But at 12 years old, I actually, within a context that was confined to a religious tradition, but I had a very mystical experience. And what I can say to you is it's my first stage of kind of owning myself as the sacred prostitute, as a sexual healer for all of who I am. That calling came when I was 12 years old, and here at 12 years old, somehow in the environment that had been set, I was invited into actually getting opened up to spirit and to the divine. And there was a call, and what I find is a calling really comes when we're vulnerable. A calling really happens when we're metaphorically naked, and sometimes physically naked. And so my call in that 12-year-old little body was to hear my commitment to service to the divine. And I didn't know what that meant. I just said yes to it, and I knew that I felt through my body this whoosh, this energy, And for days afterwards, I felt like I was connected. This happened in kind of a woodland area. So all the trees around me, I felt like I was connected to the trees and they were talking to me as much as the people were. And so this spiritual calling to say yes to the divine, open myself up to the divine, and to be of service to the divine happened when I was just a little boy. And then shortly after that, I had what I call my initiation. So, I was later a teenager, and as a teenager, starting to explore my sexuality as a gay man and never being able to even have the right terms because nobody ever talked about being gay, and I just knew in the culture that it was not okay. But I had an experience, and I call it my initiation experience. And my initiation experience was simply that I had sex with a man who was a bit older than I was. So here I was, late teens, and as I'm having sex, and it was juicy, and we were having fun, and I was just, enjoying this experience of exploring, and it was all new and exciting and sensual, and all of the good feelings were bubbling through in the circuits of my body, and it was juicy, and da 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 da, and all of a sudden the man says, "What did you do to me?" And I remember what I had felt as we were having sex or making love, that same went through my body, just like it did when I was a boy and I said yes to the divine to be of service. I knew something had happened, and he said, well, I'd had tendonitis in my arm for years, and it gives me a great deal of pain, and all that pain went away. That initiation for me was like putting on my true color. It was like, oh, I came home to my body, and I love kind of purples and blues, and so my true color, to be wrapped in my true color, was actually having a sexual experience that just awakened me. Then, many years later, maybe 15 more years later, here I am, a budding psychotherapist and working with gay queer men especially, and it's my specialty field, and counseling, and to make sure that I didn't run into my clients. I often would leave the city where I was practicing and go to other cities so that I could have play dates and explore my sexuality safely. And so here I am driving along in my car, and I'm chanting. And I've lived many years now with this cloak of knowing that experience of the erotic and spiritual being the same thing from that experience that I had with that man. And I'm driving to a bathhouse in Indianapolis, Indiana, and as I'm chanting, I feel a presence in my car. And here I am chanting, and this presence comes in my car, and I have been musing about how I could bring the wisdom of sacred sexuality to my gay brothers. And I came up with a name for a group or a community called Flesh and Spirit, and I was just musing about it, and this sense of a presence was in my car, and that presence was someone who had just died from AIDS not too much earlier, and I felt him to say, Kirk, I want to help you with this. I want to help you with this work called Flesh and Spirit. And of course, mad that I am, I had a friend who is kind of a psychic medium, and after I'd had this experience, I went to him and he pulled out his tarot cards, and I said, I just had this experience, and he didn't know who it was that I was talking about, and I said, somebody came, and some presence came, and he said, oh, as he pulls out a tarot card, he said the man's name was Theodore, and he just wants to let you know that he wants to help you with this work that you're starting. Well, my psychic medium guy didn't know anything, and whether he was just kind of reading my joy and my bliss, or whether he really tuned into all of that, is yet to be decided by all of you and how you put things together. What I know is that I felt like I had a companion with me already, an ally with me, on this calling of being a sacred prostitute, of bringing erotic spirituality to men, and starting a community called Flesh and Spirit Community. And that was my activation. And a number of years after that, and I'm putting on the work called Flesh and Spirit, and so I want to learn everything that I can about sacred sexuality. And I went to a men's conference, a gay queer men's conference, and a man was there named James Broughton. And I would call James Broughton, he's long deceased now, but James was clearly someone I identify in our community as a sacred prostitute, a man who knew about erotic spirituality and held that in every fiber of his being. And he had us doing all kinds of rituals together, and touching each other's hearts and genitals, and making those connections, and look into each other's eyes and breathe. So all of this sacred prostitute kind of work that is now kind of flowing through our community. James Broughton was one of those pioneers that brought much of that. But he said to me, Kirk, on that weekend, you, Kirk, are a sexual healer. So of course there has to be a t-shirt for it. But I am a sexual healer. As you listen to this video, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, what your gender, your orientation, the sacred prostitute is an archetype about sexual healing, an archetype of integrating the erotic and the spiritual as one and the same, and about having erotic power not just to bring pleasure to yourself and the world, that's certainly part of it, but also to be of service, embodied service in the world. In today's world, there are lots of things that break our hearts open that need our service. And the sacred prostitute is really one of those archetypes I believe is being called into us again, to awaken us so that we have our calling and remember it and get initiated and activated so that we can really name ourselves. So I'm going to have you in the close of this video just to say, I am a sacred prostitute. See what you feel in your body. Or let's make it a little softer. I am a sexual healer. What does that feel like in your body? If you're a queer person, you are, just by owning who you are, clearly vibrating and saying, I am a sexual healer, because you've healed yourself to be out, and you heal others by inviting them into knowing who you authentically are. So may this tape feed you, and this video feed you, and give you some ideas so you might truly be your true colors. Namaste.